For months, the matter appeared settled. The courtroom had spoken, the gavel had fallen, and in the eyes of many Nigerians, the long-running legal battle surrounding Nnamdi Kanu had reached its inevitable conclusion: a conviction. The state had acted. The judiciary had ruled. The law, it seemed, had delivered its final word. But in Nigeria, history has taught one hard lesson. When silence lasts too long in high-stakes politics, it is rarely peace, it is preparation. And then, quietly, without press conferences, without drama, without the usual political theater, the Attorney General of the Federation moved. Not with rhetoric, not with politics, but with law. And in that single move, everything Nigerians thought they understood about the case began to fracture. Inside Abuja's legal corridors, news does not break loudly, it leaks. Lawyers murmured about unusual filings. Court watchers noticed unfamiliar arguments surfacing in appellate discussions. Senior advocates began asking the same question in private. Why is the Attorney General stepping into a case already decided by a trial court? In Nigeria's legal architecture, the AGF is not just another lawyer. He is the chief law officer of the Federation, constitutionally bound not to emotions, not to politics, but to legality. When that office intervenes, it is never casual. And this intervention was anything but. Public perception had framed the case as personal, about a separatist leader, a controversial figure, a symbol that divided opinion across the country. But the AGF's intervention quietly dismantled that framing. According to court documents and legal insiders familiar with the matter, the concern raised was not guilt or innocence. It was something far more dangerous to the system: legality. Specifically, whether the foundation upon which the conviction stood was solid under Nigeria's constitutional order. In Nigerian law, there is a principle older than the Fourth Republic itself. No citizen can be punished except under a law that exists, is valid, and is enforceable at the time of trial. If that principle collapses, even once, every conviction becomes negotiable. That was the real issue now staring the justice system in the face. If you care about how power actually works in this country, not the noise, not the theater, but the legal structures that hold or break, subscribe to this channel. We explain what official statements will not. Hit the like button if you value clarity over confusion, and drop a comment: should legality ever be sacrificed for political convenience? At the heart of the intervention was a question few institutions enjoy answering. Did the court act strictly within the boundaries of existing law? This was not framed as an attack on the judiciary. It was framed as a test of jurisdiction, the invisible line that gives courts their authority. In Nigerian legal tradition, jurisdiction is everything. Without it, proceedings are not merely flawed, they are void. And that is where the tension escalated.
Nigeria's justice system is designed with layers of protection. Trial courts interpret law, prosecutors verify legal foundations before charges are filed, appellate courts scrutinize procedure, the Attorney General serves as a constitutional check on illegality. Each layer exists to prevent one catastrophic failure: punishing a citizen under a law that does not legally exist. The system assumes that before any conviction is secured, multiple authorities have confirmed that the law being applied is valid, current, and enforceable. But what happens when that assumption breaks? What happens when a case moves through the entire system, from charge to trial to conviction, and only afterwards does a higher legal authority raise the possibility that the foundation itself may have been invalid? That is not a minor procedural error. That is a breakdown. In this case, the issue centered on whether the law used to secure the conviction was still legally alive at the time of trial. Nigerian law is clear. Repealed statutes cannot be enforced. Amended provisions must reflect their current form. Courts cannot apply expired legal frameworks. If a law has been struck down, amended, or replaced, it ceases to have force, and convictions built on laws without force are built on sand. The AGF's intervention suggested that this fundamental check may have failed, not because of malice, not because of conspiracy, but because layers that should catch errors did not. Trial courts rely on prosecutors to present valid law. Prosecutors assume trial judges will verify jurisdiction. Appellate courts trust that foundational issues were resolved at trial. When each assumes the other has checked, no one checks, and citizens pay the price. Imagine if this standard applied to any Nigerian. Imagine being convicted under a law that no longer exists, detained under authority that has expired, punished under a framework the state itself no longer recognizes. Ask yourself what protects you if procedure fails. The answer should be the system itself. But when the system is what failed, protection becomes uncertain. Senior legal analysts began to voice what many had been reluctant to say publicly. If the conviction rests on a repealed or improperly applied statute, it is not just questionable, it is void. And if it is void, what sustains the detention that follows?
Here is where the narrative flips entirely. Contrary to popular belief, the AGF's move was not interpreted in legal circles as an attempt to rescue an individual. It was seen as an attempt to rescue the integrity of the system itself. Because in constitutional democracies, the state does not win when it secures convictions. The state wins when convictions survive scrutiny. A conviction overturned due to procedural illegality does more damage than an acquittal ever could. It tells citizens that rules are optional, that laws can be stretched, that outcomes matter more than process. For a country already battling trust deficits in its institutions, that risk is existential. When a conviction collapses not because of innocence, but because the state failed to follow its own rules, it undermines every lawful conviction that follows. It creates a precedent that legitimacy is negotiable. And once legitimacy becomes negotiable, authority erodes. The AGF's intervention may have been designed to prevent that erosion, not by protecting one defendant, but by protecting the principle that keeps the entire system credible. If the law was misapplied, correcting it strengthens the state. Ignoring it weakens everything. This raised uncomfortable questions across the legal community. Should legality ever be sacrificed for results? What happens when final judgments are not actually final? And if errors of this magnitude can occur in high-profile cases, how many have occurred in cases no one is watching? The stakes were no longer about one courtroom. They were about whether Nigeria's justice system operates on law or on outcomes. And that question does not disappear simply because it is uncomfortable. Under Nigeria's Constitution, deprivation of liberty must rest on valid legal authority. If the authority is under serious constitutional challenge, detention itself becomes questionable. This was not framed emotionally, it was framed structurally. If a conviction is void, what sustains custody? If the legal ground is unstable, how long can liberty be suspended? These were not rhetorical questions, they were constitutional ones. And constitutional questions do not disappear simply because they are uncomfortable. Across Nigeria, reactions split along familiar lines. Some saw danger, others saw overdue accountability, many saw politics. But within the legal community, the consensus was quieter and colder. This case could determine whether courts must re-examine how they apply repealed or amended laws, whether prosecutors face stricter obligations to verify legal foundations,
whether the Supreme Court reasserts its role as guardian of process, not popularity. And above all, whether legality remains supreme, even when emotions run high. If nothing is corrected, the consequences extend far beyond this case. It sets a precedent that convictions need not rest on valid law, that detention can continue even when legal authority is disputed, that finality matters more than legality. And if that becomes the standard, no citizen is protected. The possible paths forward remain uncertain. The Supreme Court has not spoken. The constitutional questions have not been resolved. The responsibilities for ensuring legal validity remain unanswered. What makes this case different is not the personalities involved, it is the timing. In an era where public trust in institutions is fragile, every legal misstep carries amplified consequences. And when the Attorney General steps in, not to argue politics, but to question process, it signals something deeper. A warning, a correction, or a line being drawn. The conviction may stand, it may fall, or it may be reshaped entirely. But one thing is already clear. This is no longer just a trial outcome, it is a test of Nigeria's rule of law. And until the final word is spoken, the silence will remain heavy, and the nation will keep watching. This story is not ending here. What happens next will redefine boundaries, not just for this case, but for every Nigerian who believes the law should mean what it says. Stay with this channel if you want clarity, not noise, because when the system speaks again, you will need to understand what it is really saying.